All right, so now it's time to add our image. We had in the demonstration, we had an image of some dude riding his Segway and having a grand time. So here's how we're going to do that. Oh, I've got too many screens open here. So if I just have an image right here on my desktop. So I'm going to right click on that image and I'm going to say copy and go back to my Android Studio here, and I'm going to go into my resource folder and right click on drawable, because this is where our image resources are going to reside. Right click and I should be able to, I'm right clicking on that folder that says drawable, and then it'll say paste. So that's what I'm going to do. And I will accept the defaults. We should be good for the short run. The name should stay the same. It's being put into that drawable folder, and I'm going to click on OK. And so then we should now be able to, in our palette, look on ImageView. Under Common, I have this ImageView. So let's see, first thing I'm going to do is drag my button down because I'm going to have it below the image. You can see the constraints are changing, that I have a margin, how much farther away from the title view. We'll fix that. We're going to actually restrain our button to our image, but let's get our image on here first. So I'm going to put my image on here. I'm going to use the little dotted lines to try and center it. There we go. And let go. And I get a pop-up that asks me what image. I'm going to click on Project and choose the image that I imported or pasted in, the Segway, and then click on OK. All right. So a couple of things. Just this is really a good review more than anything else. I can see that I've got that red exclamation point indicating that I haven't set my constraints for my image, which is true. It's also off screen, which I don't really want, so I'm going to drag it in. Remember, since I haven't set the constraints, that it will default. If I run my emulator now, the image will automatically come up here into the corner, so I need to set my constraints. So we'll do that. First thing I'm going to do though is I'm going to delete the constraints, my horizontal constraints here on my button, because I really want to, I guess I did the wrong ones. There we go. I really want to set the button to the image and the image to the text. So I'm going to click on the image and I'm going to drag my constraint to the title view there. And I'm going to say off of the title, we're going to go, let's do 24 just to push it off a little bit. So now my constraints for the image is set to the title or the text view. And then I'm going to, with the image selected, I'm going to just set it to the left and right. So now my horizontal constraints are taken care of as well. So I've now gone to a warning label, warning message instead of the error message. We'll get to that in a minute. I'm also going to set my layout width on my image to match the constraint. In other words, the image is going to take up the full amount of space that the constraint is, that it's constrained to. So in other words, wrap content is just going to be as big as the amount of space I require, but layout width is going to be constrained to the entire width. So we also need to set our constraints for our buttons, so we'll add that. I'll set the constraints to the image. We'll set it, give it a margin from the image, and then I think I'll set the constraints to the left and right. But now you can see, because I've used wrap content, that this button is only taking up the size of itself, as opposed to if I had said match the constraint, it would take up the full width of that space. So I don't want to do that. I'm going to keep it to wrap content. All right, so now let's see. Now I have all of my red messages. I'm going to pull that down a little bit more. All right. All of my red messages taken care of, but the image view now has this exclamation point. So let's look at what that has to do with. It says image without content description. So what that's explaining is, if we look at one of our, let me close the layout here. I have my image selected. If I look at one of my common attributes is content description, and content description is a alternative text to the image should somebody have a hard time reading the image. So if you have a screen reader or something along those lines. So it's a warning, but let's acknowledge that warning as a review. So I can click, I can type in the text directly, hard code it here, but as good practice dictates, I'm going to go back to the resource and add it to that strings XML file. I haven't given it a ID yet, so I will. This is image segue, and maybe what I want it to say is people, just a description, people writing, or maybe a person writing segue. All right, so we'll add that to, that's being added to the strings XML file, remember. So that's why we're getting this ampersand string and image segue. So we also have to give this an ID, image, img segue. Okay, so now I've completed that. Oh, it's saying, do I need to update everything? The answer is yes, everything should be propagated or refactored accordingly. So now we should be good. Now if you run your emulator, we should have text and an image. I think before I run that, just kind of a review that I'm going to change my text size. That seems awful small, so we'll go a little bit bigger. That looks better. My text size here should probably be a little bit bigger. All right. Notice that my layout isn't quite as centered anymore, so I'm going to ask this to center. So I'm moving this little dot to 50 so that my button is centered across the screen and the margins automatically took care of themselves. So that should be good to go. So now if you run this in your emulator, if you have set your constraints for all of your widgets, everything should be lined up exactly the way you set it up in your design screen. Okay, and it looks like it's doing exactly what I had hoped it to do. So in our next video, then we will attach a click event to our button so that we can load a new screen.